Unix wasn't designed. It was an accident, a discarded computer, a bored programmer. 8 kilobytes of memory, less than a single modern favicon image, and yet the operating system born in that basement still runs the internet. Your phone runs a descendant of this machine. The servers that delivered this video run a descendant of this machine. And almost everything we believe about how Unix was built is wrong. The textbooks say Unix was a masterpiece of intentional design, a philosophy of elegant simplicity engineered from the start by visionaries who knew exactly what they were building. None of that is true. This is no tech, and this is the real story of Unix. To understand why Unix mattered, you need to understand what it replaced. In 1966, IBM released the System 360. It was the most successful computer in history up to that point, and it was a nightmare to program. Operating systems in this era were monolithic. Every component touched every other component. Write a program for one machine, and it ran on that machine. Move to a different manufacturer's hardware, and you rewrote everything from scratch. The operating system and the hardware were one inseparable thing. That was the problem everyone accepted as permanent. And then there was Multics. Multics was the most ambitious computing project of the 1960s. Bell Labs, MIT, and General Electric pooled years of engineering talent into a single time-sharing system meant to serve hundreds of users simultaneously. The goal was a computing utility, like electricity, always on, always available. It was, by every measure, too complicated to finish on schedule. The complexity wasn't a bug in the plan. The complexity was the plan, and it became its own failure mode. Each new feature required coordinating with dozens of existing subsystems. The team kept adding capability and kept slipping their delivery dates. The project consumed years of work from some of the best systems programmers in the world and still couldn't ship reliably. By 1969, Bell Labs had had enough. They pulled out entirely. And that decision, made in frustration, not foresight, accidentally changed everything. Ken Thompson was 27 years old and suddenly without a project. He had spent years working toward Multics. Now, Multics was dead. But there was this machine in the corner, a PDP-7, already obsolete, already scheduled for decommissioning. 8 kilobytes of usable memory. For context, a single uncompressed bitmap icon on a modern website typically requires more storage than the entire working memory of this machine. Thompson started playing with it. He wrote a game first, Space Travel, a simulation of the solar system. Simple, line-drawn planets, a tiny spacecraft, minimal interface. It was a toy, but building the toy forced a sequence of problems he hadn't anticipated. To run the game, he needed a file system. To manage the file system, he needed a kernel. To use the kernel, he needed a shell. One constraint pulled the next into existence. In roughly 3 weeks, he had the skeleton of an operating system. His wife and son were away for the month, visiting her parents in California. He had the lab largely to himself. He later described the process with characteristic understatement. 1 week for the kernel, 1 week for the shell, 1 week for the editor. There was no architecture committee, no requirements document, no specification for what this thing was supposed to become. Dennis Ritchie joined shortly after, And together, they built something that worked without entirely understanding why it worked. The machine had 8 kilobytes of memory. Every line of code had to earn its place. You could not afford abstraction for its own sake. You could not afford redundancy. Every function had to do something real, or it got cut. Thompson later said the constraint was clarifying. When you cannot afford waste, you stop producing it. That constraint, not philosophy, not vision, is what made Unix small. Small enough to fit on one machine. Small enough for 2 people to understand entirely. Small enough, it turned out, to move. But here is where the story gets more interesting and more consequential. Unix version 1 was written in assembly language. Assembly is fast. It is also completely married to the hardware it runs on. Every instruction in PDP-7 assembly referenced specific memory addresses and registers that existed only on that machine. If you wanted to run Unix on a different computer, you rewrote it. The whole thing. From scratch. Meanwhile, Dennis Ritchie was working on something else entirely. A new programming language. He called it C. It grew out of an earlier language called B, which Ken Thompson had created by adapting an older language called BCPL. Thompson built B. Ritchie then built C on top of Thompson's B. C was not the first high-level language. Fortran had existed since 1957, COBOL since 1959. But C occupied a position no language had held before. It gave you direct control over memory. It felt close to the machine. And it could be compiled for different hardware architectures more easily than assembly, though compiler support varied by platform and expanded over time as C compilers were ported to new machines. Starting in 1973, Thompson and Ritchie began rewriting Unix in C, gradually replacing assembly code with portable C implementations. While some hardware-specific assembly remained necessary for low-level operations, the majority of the kernel was now expressed in a high-level language. The same kernel functionality in a language that could be adapted for hardware that didn't exist yet when they wrote it. This was the moment Unix became something more than a personal project on a forgotten machine. One C source file, compiled for a PDP-11. It ran. Compiled for a VAX. It ran. Compiled for a third architecture. It ran. The same code, 3 machines, 3 different hardware designs, 0 rewrites. Unix was now, for the first time, a portable operating system. And this was also the first time a major operating system had been written substantially in a high-level language at all. Not because anyone planned it that way, because C made it inevitable. The rewrite was practical. Assembly was becoming a maintenance burden as the system grew. The portability was a side effect, a very consequential side effect. Every operating system written since, Linux, macOS, Windows NT, follows this same approach. The kernel is written in C, or a language that directly inherited C's philosophy of close-to-hardware portability. Linus Torvalds wrote the Linux kernel in C in 1991. Apple's XNU kernel, which runs every iPhone and Mac, is written in C. Even Microsoft's Windows NT kernel, written by Dave Cutler's team starting in 1988, is written in C. One rewrite, 50 years of consequence. Now, here is the part that most histories get backwards. The Unix philosophy, do one thing well, compose small tools, handle text streams, is almost always presented as the founding vision, the original intention, the design principle that Thompson and Ritchie started with in 1969. They were not. Doug McIlroy wrote that memo in 1978. Unix had been running for 9 years before anyone wrote down why it worked. McIlroy was not an outsider observing from a distance. He was one of the key contributors, the person who invented Unix pipes. That single operator, the vertical bar character, lets you chain programs together. The output of one becomes the input of the next. It is one of the most powerful ideas in the history of software interfaces, and it came from McIlroy's frustration with having to write intermediate files every time he wanted to connect two programs. But here is what McIlroy actually wrote in that 1978 memo. He described what Unix had already become. He used the present tense. This is the Unix philosophy. Not, this was the plan. Not, this is what we designed. This is what it is. A description of an existing system, not a specification for a future one. The small tools emerged from constraint, not conviction. Thompson and Ritchie built small because 8 kilobytes left no other option. McIlroy looked at what they had built under pressure and articulated the principle underneath it. He named the pattern. He did not invent it. The practice came first, shaped by necessity. The principle followed, recognized by someone smart enough to see the pattern. That is how most engineering philosophies actually work. And Unix is the clearest example in computing history of a design philosophy that was reverse engineered from a working system rather than applied to one. But the strangest part of this story has nothing to do with code.
In 1956, 13 years before Unix existed, AT&T signed a consent decree with the U.S. Department of Justice, settling antitrust charges related to its telephone monopoly. The decree restricted AT&T from leveraging that monopoly into other business sectors. This meant Bell Labs could continue its research, but AT&T faced significant constraints on commercializing products outside of telecommunications. It could not turn its innovations into software products sold on the open market. Bell Labs had invented Unix. Bell Labs was part of AT&T, which meant AT&T could not sell Unix commercially as a software product, not as a packaged product, not as a licensed service, not in any form that generated revenue from the software itself. So they gave it away. Universities could license Unix for essentially the cost of the magnetic tape it shipped on, $99 for educational use, full source code included. That detail matters enormously. Not just the binary, but the source. Students could read it, modify it, break it, and understand it from the inside out. No other major operating system offered that. IBM certainly didn't. DEC didn't. Only Unix came with a manual and a complete view of its own internals. By the mid-1970s, Unix was running in computer science departments across North America. A generation of students learned systems programming on it, not on proprietary IBM software, not on locked-down vendor systems, but on Unix, with the source code in hand. At Berkeley, a group of graduate students started modifying it. They called their version BSD, Berkeley Software Distribution. The first BSD release shipped in 1977. Later releases pushed the system significantly further. 4.2 BSD, released in 1983, introduced TCP/IP networking, the protocol stack that became the foundation of the Internet. Think about what that means. If AT&T had been permitted to commercialize Unix in 1969, a single company would have owned the operating system layer of computing through the entire personal computer era. Every server, every workstation, every university computer. The industry would have been structured around one vendor's licensing terms, one vendor's roadmap, one vendor's decisions about what features to build and what to charge. Instead, a legal settlement written to regulate telephone monopolies, not software, not computers, not anything that looked remotely like Unix, accidentally created the conditions for open-source software to exist. BSD begat Linux. Linux begat Android. The entire open-source movement traces a direct line back to a courtroom settlement in 1956 that no one in that courtroom could have imagined would matter to software at all. So here is what actually happened. Unix was not engineered by visionaries with a grand plan. It was assembled by two programmers working around constraints they didn't choose, on hardware nobody wanted, in a language that didn't exist when they started. The philosophy came 9 years after the code. The portability came from a rewrite 4 years after the kernel. The open-source revolution came from an antitrust case about telephone monopolies filed in 1949 and settled in 1956, before the transistor had even reached commercial production. And this is what the accident actually teaches us. Constraints are not the enemy of good software. They are frequently the source of it. 8 kilobytes forced every abstraction to be real. Every function had to justify its memory cost. The discipline came from scarcity, and the elegance followed from the discipline. The Unix philosophy isn't a blueprint. It's a diagnosis, written after the patient was already healthy, by someone perceptive enough to read the symptoms correctly. The next time you open a terminal, or connect to a Linux server, or unlock an iPhone, you are running the consequence of one programmer filling a free afternoon on a machine nobody wanted, inside a legal constraint nobody planned, using a language that didn't exist yet. Unix isn't the only foundational system built by accident, under constraint, on discarded hardware, but it is the one that runs under almost everything else. I'm here to help you know the systems that shaped the digital world. What other computing origin story do you think we've gotten wrong? Tell me in the comments. See you at the next terminal.